Hey, dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a romantic, funny love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. The old wooden church stood in the heart of a small Vermont town where the golden rays of sunset streamed through stained glass windows, casting shimmering rainbow patterns across the wooden floor. The scent of roses and wild daisies drifted through the air, mingling with the murmurs of guests who filled the pews. In front of a modestly decorated altar, entwined with green vines, Claire Bennett stood alone, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the field behind her house. Her pristine white wedding dress, stitched by her own hands, every seam and thread crafted with care, hugged her slender frame. But now that delicate silk was soaked with tears. Claire, 28, was a wedding invitation designer with a delicate soul and a gifted hand. Every card she created was like a work of art, telling love stories through her lettering and illustrations. She had spent months preparing for this day, from sewing her own silk gown during countless late nights to assembling her simple bouquet, from writing her vows by hand and tucking them into her dress pocket to setting each flickering candle at the altar. Trevor Adams, her fiancé, was a successful lawyer with a dazzling smile and big ambitions. He once swept her off her feet with promises of a loving home and a future built together. Claire had believed today would mark the beginning of that dream, but when the organist stopped playing and guests began to fidget, her heart sank like a snapped guitar string. Father Thompson, an elderly man with silver hair and thin-rimmed glasses, looked at Claire with deep sympathy. He cleared his throat gently, trying to buy time, but the church aisle remained empty. Claire stood frozen, eyes locked on the wooden doors where Trevor should have entered, beaming as he once did when holding her hand. But there was only silence. Cold, brutal silence. Then the phone in the small silk pouch at her side buzzed. With trembling hands, she opened the message, and the words appeared like a blade slicing through her chest. "Claire, I'm sorry. I can't." No explanation. No goodbye. Just 5 cold words, enough to shatter every dream she had held on to. Her phone slipped from her hands, hitting the wooden floor with a loud thud that echoed in the silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Claire's knees buckled. She clung to the altar edge, her nails digging into the old wood as she fought not to collapse. Hot, uncontrollable tears streamed down her cheeks, soaking the bodice of her dress where she had once carefully embroidered tiny silver flowers. The whispers grew louder, like a vicious wave crashing over her. A woman in a bright pink hat leaned to the person beside her and sneered. She really thought she was good enough for someone like Trevor? Pathetic. A teenager in the back row held up his phone, recording Claire's heartbreak with glinting amusement in his eyes, as if watching a tragic play. Some of Trevor's friends shook their head, their expressions a mix of pity and curiosity. Her father, Henry, a weathered carpenter with calloused hands and a worn face, sat motionless in the front row, eyes blank, as if the shock had broken something inside him. Her mother had died years ago, and now Claire felt more alone than ever, like a bird with a broken wing caught in a storm. She wanted to run, to rip the dress apart and disappear into the green hills of Vermont, where she had played as a child. But her legs felt nailed to the ground. The judgmental eyes of the crowd bore down on her, turning her into a spectacle. A bride abandoned at the altar, her pain on full display for the whole town to mock. She felt like she was drowning, her breath short, chest tightening, every quiet snicker like a needle in her heart. Then through the chaos, a calm, steady voice rose from behind her, like a beam of light piercing the darkness. "Don't let them belittle you just because you're hurting." Claire turned, her vision blurred with tears, her breath hitching. The man standing before her was Gavin Shaw, Trevor's best friend. She'd only seen him a few times at engagement parties or brief encounters, where he always remained quiet, almost blending into the background. At 34, Gavin was a billionaire in the finance world, known for his discretion and unapproachable demeanor. He wore a dark suit, his tousled black hair and sharp blue eyes giving him a commanding presence. But now his gaze wasn't cold as she'd once thought. It held a deep sadness, as if he carried a wound of his own. Gavin stepped closer, his voice low but firm, just loud enough for her to hear amidst the whispers. You don't deserve this, Claire. No one has the right to laugh at your pain. She blinked, trying to process his words. His voice carried a strange strength, like a lifeline thrown into stormy waters. But she still couldn't believe it. What are you saying? She whispered, her voice barely audible through her tears. Gavin looked into her eyes, unwavering. If you'll let me, I'll be the groom. I'll stand beside you, right now. His words struck like thunder, silencing the entire church. The crowd fell still. Even Father Thompson's eyes widened, the Bible in his hands trembling slightly. Claire's mind spun. Marry a stranger? The idea was insane, like something out of one of those cheap romance novels she used to read. But Gavin's eyes held no trace of mockery. They were sincere, intense, and full of a pain she recognized even if she didn't yet understand it. She looked out at the crowd, at the sneering smiles, the phone still raised to record her humiliation. She saw her father, his hands clenched, eyes silently pleading for a way out of this nightmare. She thought of Trevor, who had left her without a second glance, exposing her to the ridicule of everyone. Then she looked back at Gavin, this near stranger, standing amid the wreckage of her dream, offering her a chance to reclaim her dignity. Why? She asked, voice shaking, tears still falling. Why would you do this? Gavin hesitated, his jaw tight, as if her question touched something deep within. Then he said slowly, because I know what it feels like to be left behind, and I don't want you to go through it alone. His words struck her heart like an invisible thread pulling their pain together. She didn't know his story, but the truth in his voice made her trust him. This wasn't a joke, nor a gesture of pity. This was a hand extended in the dark, and though she didn't know why, she wanted to take it. Father Thompson cleared his throat awkwardly, breaking the silence. Miss Bennett, do you wish to proceed? He asked, voice hesitant, as if even he couldn't believe what was happening. Claire took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She looked at Gavin, still standing firm, his eyes never leaving hers. She thought of her pain, the shame awaiting her if she left that church alone. Then she nodded, softly but surely. Yes, I do. A wave of murmurs rolled through the room like static electricity. Some guests gasped, others shook their heads in disbelief. But Gavin didn't flinch. He stepped up beside her at the altar, his presence forming a barrier against the gawking eyes and cruel whispers. Father Thompson opened the Bible, muttering something about never seeing anything like this in his 40 years. He cleared his throat, then began the ceremony again, voice trembling but trying to remain solemn. Gavin Shaw, do you take Claire Bennett as your wife, to live together in love and respect, until death do you part? Gavin looked straight into Claire's eyes, gentle yet resolute. I do. His voice was deep and clear, with not a trace of hesitation. Claire felt a shiver run down her spine. When it was her turn, she repeated the vows, her voice trembling but firm. I do. During the ring exchange, Gavin gently took her hand. I don't have a wedding ring, he whispered, his voice low for only her to hear. But this is all I have. He slid a simple silver ring from his own finger and placed it on hers. It was a little loose, the cool metal startling against her skin. She had no ring to give in return, but Gavin simply smiled. It's okay. We'll figure it out. The crowd was silent, holding their breath. No more scoffs, no more phones raised, only stunned awe at something no one expected. When Father Thompson declared them husband and wife, Claire felt as if she were living in a dream, one that had shattered, only to be pieced back together by mismatched, strange fragments. You may kiss the bride, Father Thompson said, his voice uncertain, as if unsure it would actually happen. Gavin looked at Claire, his gaze warm but not demanding. Only if you want to, he whispered gently. She shook her head, not because she didn't want to, but because she wasn't ready. Everything had happened too fast, too suddenly. Gavin nodded with understanding, no trace of offense, his eyes still kind. He extended his hand and Claire took it, feeling the strength in his grip. The organist, after a hesitant pause, began a soft melody. Gavin and Claire walked down the aisle, hand in hand, past the stunned faces of the guests. A few clapped uncertainly, unsure how to react. Claire's father stood, embracing her tightly. "You made me proud," he said, voice choked, eyes glistening with tears. He looked at Gavin, both grateful and cautious. "Take care of my girls, son." Gavin nodded solemnly. "I will, sir." Outside the church, the Vermont sky was tinged pink as dusk settled. There was no wedding reception, no confetti, no raucous toasts. Only Claire and Gavin stood by his sleek black sedan, facing an uncertain future. Some guests avoided her eyes, others approached with awkward congratulations. Claire realized they didn't know what to say. Neither did she. Gavin opened the car door for her, his voice steady. "We don't have to stay here. I'll take you anywhere you want to go." Claire looked back at the church where the dream of a life with Trevor had crumbled. She thought of the months of preparation, the late nights sewing, the smiles Trevor gave as he promised her the world. Then she looked at Gavin, the man who had stepped into her life not out of love, but for reasons she still couldn't fully understand. She gripped the silver ring on her finger, feeling its weight. "Let's go," she said softly but surely. As the car pulled away from the small town, Claire felt a strange sense of release. She didn't know what lay ahead. She had just married a near stranger, in a moment when the world had turned against her. But when she glanced at Gavin, quietly focused on the road, she felt the smallest flicker of hope. Not love, not yet, but a chance to begin again. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of her story, but the start of something entirely different. Gavin's sleek, black sedan glided smoothly along the roads leading back to Boston, leaving behind the small Vermont town and the painful memories of a ruined wedding day. Claire sat in the passenger seat, her eyes distant as she stared out the window, where rows of autumn gold trees blurred past like a fading watercolor. The silver ring on her finger, Gavin's unexpected gift, still felt foreign, slightly loose and cold. She had no idea where she was headed. All she knew was that she had agreed to step into a new life, a strange marriage with a man she had only met hours earlier. Gavin, quiet and focused behind the wheel, said little throughout the drive. He broke the silence only once, when they stopped at a small gas station. "Do you need anything? Water, food, or anything at all?" he asked, his voice low but gentle. Claire shook her head, offering a faint smile to mask her confusion. "Thank you, I'm okay." But she wasn't. She was still trying to understand how she'd ended up here, in the car of a financial billionaire, carrying the title of his wife. They arrived in Boston after nightfall. Gavin took Claire to his penthouse, located on the top floor of a luxurious high-rise overlooking the Charles River. When the elevator doors opened, Claire couldn't help but be overwhelmed. The space was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows, gleaming wooden floors, and minimalist, elegant decor. Everything was perfect, yet sterile, as if this wasn't a home but a museum, preserving untouched memories. Gavin set his keys on the table and turned to Claire. "This will be your home for the time being," he said, voice even but sincere. "I know everything happened too fast. I don't want you to feel pressured, so I'm proposing a deal." Claire looked at him, her eyes still red but now glinting with curiosity. "What kind of deal?" Gavin pulled a folder from a drawer and placed it in front of her. "A temporary marriage. 6 months. Long enough for the gossip in Vermont to die down, so your family isn't harassed, and for you to find your footing again. After that, if you want, we can divorce. No strings attached, no obligations." Claire skimmed the contract, dry but clear wording. Their finances would remain completely separate. She would have no claim on his assets, and he would not interfere with hers. They would not invade each other's privacy. No intimacy would be expected. She looked up at him. "Why are you doing this? You don't have to. Save me." Gavin was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting into the distance. "Because I've been at a point where everything collapsed, and I wish someone had done this for me." She didn't press further. His words carried a weight she couldn't yet understand, but enough for her to nod. "All right, I agree." They signed the contract under the warm golden lights of the penthouse, and just like that, Claire Bennett became the wife of Gavin Shaw. Not out of love, but out of a strange promise between two people with scars. The first few days of cohabitation were a string of awkward adjustments. Claire was given her own bedroom, spacious and well-appointed, but she still felt like a guest. Gavin, true to the contract, kept his distance. He left the house early each morning, returned late at night, and their conversations were limited to polite basics like, "Did you eat dinner?" or "Do you need anything?" Claire, used to the warmth of small-town life, found the penthouse too big, too cold, like a maze with no clear exit. But Claire wasn't the type to sit idle. One morning after Gavin had left for work, she explored the kitchen, a modern space that looked abandoned. The fridge was nearly empty, holding only a few bottles of water and an expired tub of butter. A thin layer of dust coated the countertops, as if no one had touched them in years. Claire stood still, realizing that despite his wealth, Gavin didn't really live here. He merely existed. She started cleaning. She wiped the shelves, reorganized forgotten pots, and bought some groceries from a nearby store. That evening, she cooked a simple meal, pumpkin soup with cream and toasted bread. When Gavin returned, the smell from the kitchen stopped him at the doorway. He saw Claire standing by the stove, wearing an apron she'd found in a drawer, and furrowed his brow slightly. "You don't have to do this," he said, a little awkward. Claire smiled for the first time since the wedding. "I'm not used to doing nothing. Besides, I figured we both need to eat." Gavin hesitated, then sat at the dining table, a long wooden one he rarely used. He tasted the soup, and for a moment something shifted in his expression. His eyes lost their usual guarded chill. They softened, almost nostalgic. "This," he began, then stopped as if afraid to say too much. "It's like something she used to make." "She?" Claire asked gently, careful not to intrude. Gavin looked down at the bowl, his jaw tightening. "Eleanor, my fiancée." He said no more, and Claire didn't pry. But she realized that, unintentionally, her soup had stirred a memory Gavin had kept buried for 5 years. After that night, Gavin began coming home for dinner more often. He didn't speak much, but his presence became a routine. Claire kept cooking, not just because she enjoyed it, but because she realized these meals were the only thread between them. She experimented with new dishes, from tomato pasta to homemade butter cookies, and each time she watched Gavin eat slowly, as if trying to savor each moment. One afternoon, while tidying the penthouse, Claire stumbled upon a small wooden box in the living room. Inside were old photographs, carefully arranged like treasured keepsakes. She immediately recognized the woman in the photos: golden hair, radiant smile, and warm eyes. It was undoubtedly Eleanor. There were photos of her with Gavin, both laughing in the sunlight, and others where she stood alone, holding a bouquet of lavender, as if dreaming of a future that never came. Claire closed the box, leaving everything untouched. She knew these pictures were a part of Gavin that couldn't be erased, and she respected that. But one evening, as she glanced at the calendar, she realized it was Eleanor's death anniversary, a detail Gavin had once mentioned in passing. Without saying anything, Claire quietly placed a white candle on the dining table and lit it. When Gavin came home, he paused, his eyes drawn to the flickering flame. "You?" he began, but didn't know what to say. Claire looked at him, her voice soft. "I thought she deserved to be remembered." Gavin didn't respond, but he sat down, his expression heavy with grief, and something like gratitude. They ate in silence, the candlelight between them. In that wordless moment, for the first time, Claire felt they had truly shared something. Not love, not yet, but understanding. Their life together wasn't perfect. Some days Gavin came home tense, retreating to his office without a word. Some nights Claire lay awake in her room, thinking of Vermont, her father, and wondering if she was running away or starting over. But neither of them left. They stayed, through each day, each meal, each small moment. Claire began to notice little things about Gavin: the way he always folded his newspaper precisely after reading, the way he stared out at the Charles River when he thought no one was watching. Gavin, in turn, started to change. He asked about her wedding card designs, listened when she shared new ideas. He even bought a small vase for the kitchen counter, a quiet thank you for her meals. They were still two strangers, bound by a contract and a surprise wedding. But day by day, the invisible walls between them seemed to shrink. Claire no longer saw the penthouse as cold and lifeless. Gavin no longer rushed out early each morning. They still carried their wounds, Claire's from betrayal, Gavin's from loss. But in this space, they had begun to see each other with less caution, like two survivors learning to trust again. One evening, as Claire was washing dishes, Gavin said out of the blue, "Thank you for being here." He didn't look at her, but his voice was sincere. Claire smiled, her hands still covered in soap bubbles. "Thank you for giving me a place to stay." They didn't say anything more, but in that quiet moment, they both understood. Even if temporary, they were building something. Not love, not yet, but a home, where healing could begin. Life in the Boston penthouse gradually fell into a strange rhythm for Claire and Gavin. A slow dance between two strangers learning not to step on each other's toes. The dinners Claire cooked, the quiet moments when they sat across from each other under warm lights, and Gavin's unexpected questions about her wedding card designs built a fragile sense of familiarity. But beneath that calm surface, both carried wounds yet to heal. Claire with the heartbreak of being abandoned by Trevor, and Gavin, haunted by a past he rarely spoke of. Claire began to realize that Gavin, despite his cold demeanor and confident exterior as a billionaire, wasn't the unfeeling man she had once assumed. Small details revealed his story. The way he stood by the window, staring out at the Charles River with a distant gaze. The way he avoided crowded events and declined every social invitation brought by his assistant. And the wooden box of photos of Eleanor, his late fiancée, kept carefully in the corner of the living room, like a quiet shrine he could never look away from. One evening, as Claire was sketching a wedding card at the dining table, she overheard Gavin's phone call from his study. He was turning down a charity gala invite, his tone curt but firm. "Number, I'm not going. Don't ask again." When he walked out, Claire couldn't resist her curiosity. "You don't like parties?" she asked softly, careful not to pry. Gavin paused, coffee in hand, his eyes flickering with surprise. "Not exactly," he replied evenly. "It's just, they remind me of things I'd rather not remember." He didn't elaborate, but Claire understood. She'd seen the photos of Eleanor, the radiant smile, golden hair, and eyes full of love when she stood beside Gavin. She guessed those kinds of events were once part of his life, when Eleanor was still there, when Gavin was still a man who lived by feeling, not the cold shadow he had become. Day by day, Claire began piecing together Gavin's story through the fragments he unknowingly revealed. Once, while dusting the bookshelf, she found an old notebook. Inside were handwritten notes, strong strokes filled with emotion, detailing plans for a trip to Italy. "Eleanor wants to see Florence in the spring." The journal ended on that page, as if Gavin's world had stopped the day Eleanor left. Claire closed the notebook, her chest heavy. She realized Gavin hadn't just lost his fiancée, he had lost himself. She never asked him about Eleanor, not wanting to intrude on memories he kept locked away, but she began noticing how he responded to little things. When she made pumpkin soup, he ate it slowly, as if trying to hold on to the flavor of a time long gone. When she accidentally played a jazz tune on the speaker, he stopped, eyes unfocused, as if it echoed a happy memory. Claire understood then. Gavin had never loved anyone after Eleanor. He had locked his heart away, not because he couldn't love, but because he was terrified of the pain that might come with it. One night, rain poured heavily outside as Gavin returned later than usual. Claire was curled up on the couch reading a book on calligraphy when she heard the door open. Gavin stepped in, his suit soaked, hair disheveled, and the faint scent of alcohol clinging to him. He wasn't drunk, not completely, but his eyes looked exhausted, like he had been battling invisible demons. "Rough night?" Claire asked gently, setting her book aside. Gavin collapsed onto the couch, rubbing his temples. "A party. I wasn't planning to go, but I had to." He didn't explain further, but Claire guessed it was a work-related event, one of those times he had to appear as Gavin Shaw, the finance tycoon, not Gavin the man with a wound. She got up and returned with a warm glass of water, setting it in front of him. "You okay?" she asked, sitting across from him. Gavin looked at the glass, then at her, his eyes fogged by liquor and something deeper. "You know," he began, voice low and slow, "I used to think I could forget. That if I worked enough, Made enough money, I could bury it all, but it never goes away. Claire said nothing. She knew he was talking about Eleanor. She didn't push. She just listened, waiting for him to open up on his own. Gavin held the glass but didn't drink. He stared into space, his voice barely above a whisper. Today's her birthday, Eleanor's. I went to that damn party just so I wouldn't have to think about it. But everything there, the laughter, the lights, the strangers, it only made me miss her more. Claire's heart clenched. She wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. She simply sat there, her gaze soft, waiting. And then, as if the alcohol had finally broken the wall he'd built around himself, Gavin continued, his voice trembling. When I saw you standing at the altar, Claire, I wasn't saving you. I was saving myself a second time. I couldn't let you go through what I went through. I couldn't let you feel like the world had ended and no one was there. His confession crashed over Claire like a wave. Her eyes burned and tears spilled down her cheeks. She wasn't angry. She was moved, deeply and profoundly, because for the first time, she knew she wasn't alone in her pain. Gavin, the man she once thought cold and distant, bore a wound just like hers. He hadn't married her out of love, but because he knew the agony of abandonment, and he couldn't let her fall into the same abyss he had once faced. Gavin, she whispered, voice choked, thank you for being there, for not letting me be alone. He looked at her, his gaze misty, as if her words had touched something hidden deep within him. You don't need to thank me, he said hoarsely. I should be the one thanking you. You've given me a reason to keep going. They sat there in silence, only the rain tapping against the windows. The moment wasn't romantic, not a scene from a movie. It was raw, painful, and beautiful in its own way. Claire wiped her tears and smiled softly. You should get some sleep. You're going to need coffee tomorrow. Gavin chuckled, a rare, quiet laugh, but genuine. You're right. He stood a bit unsteady, then turned back to her. Claire, I'm glad you're here. She nodded, her heart pounding. So am I. After that night, something shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but a deeper understanding. Claire began to notice how Gavin tried to linger at home longer, even if just to read the paper while she sketched. Gavin started asking her small things, like why she liked lavender, or why she chose wedding cards despite the modest income. Their conversations weren't long, but each word was like a brick, slowly building a bridge between two scarred hearts. Claire began sharing more too. One evening, over the beef stew she had learned from her mother's recipe, she told him about the day she learned her mom had died of cancer. I cried for a week, she said, her voice steady but heavy with sorrow. But the worst part was, I never got to say goodbye. Gavin listened, his eyes gentle. I know how that feels, he said quietly, and this time she knew he truly did. I never got to say goodbye to Eleanor. She left too suddenly. They didn't speak further, but the silence between them no longer felt heavy. It was like an invisible embrace, one where pain could be shared without needing explanation. Their lives were still bound by the contract. 6 months, no emotions, no interference. But Claire realized that the things left unsaid, the quiet moments where they accidentally touched each other's wounds, were drawing them closer. Gavin was no longer a stranger. He was a man who carried pain, just like her. And in this cold penthouse, they were slowly learning how to heal, step by step. One morning, as Claire was watering a vase of flowers on the kitchen counter, Gavin walked in holding one of her wedding card sketches. This is beautiful, he said, his finger tracing the delicate lines. You're talented. Claire smiled, her heart warming. Thank you. I just want to create something meaningful. Gavin looked at her, his eyes brighter than usual. You already are, more than you realize. They said no more, but that moment was enough for Claire to know that no matter how the contract ended, whether they parted after 6 months, she would never forget Gavin, the man who didn't come into her life to love her, but to show her that she was never truly alone. 3 months had passed since the unexpected wedding in Vermont, and life in the Boston penthouse had settled into its own quiet rhythm for Claire Bennett and Gavin Shaw, one still filled with fragile distances. The dinners Claire prepared, the silent yet warm moments they shared over past pain, and the glimpses Gavin gave of his memories with Eleanor all wove together a wordless bond. They weren't lovers, but they were no longer strangers. They were two survivors learning how to stand beside each other in a world full of wounds. One early autumn morning, as soft golden sunlight streamed through the windows, Claire received a call from her father, Henry. "The harvest festival's coming up," he said, his voice warm but tinged with concern. "Are you coming back?" People still talk about the wedding day. Claire's grip tightened on the phone, the sting of that memory, the day Trevor abandoned her, rising like a tide. But then she glanced at Gavin, calmly reading the newspaper at the dining table, and an idea sparked. Maybe going back to Vermont wasn't about facing judgment, but about showing Gavin a piece of the life she loved, however small or simple. "I'll come," she said to her father, then hesitated. "And I'll bring Gavin with me." There was a pause on the other end. Then her father replied, "All right, I'll get the guest room ready." Claire turned to Gavin, who was sipping his coffee. "Are you busy this weekend?" she asked casually. Gavin looked up, his sharp blue eyes curious. "Not particularly. Why?" "The Harvest Festival in Vermont," she said, running her fingers along the edge of the table. "I want to visit my dad, and I think you should come, if you'd like." Gavin lowered the paper, clearly surprised. He rarely left Boston except for short business trips, but something in Claire's earnest eyes made him hesitate. "Vermont," he repeated as if weighing the word. "All right. When do we leave?" Claire smiled, her heart lighter than she expected. "Friday. I'll get everything ready." On Friday, they left Boston in Gavin's sleek black sedan, packing light though Claire's thoughts felt anything but. She worried about returning to the town where she'd once been the center of gossip. But as she glanced at Gavin, calm and focused on the road, she felt steadier. He didn't ask many questions, occasionally playing soft jazz, and the silence between them felt natural. By the time they reached the small Vermont town, the hills were glowing under a golden sunset. Her father's wooden house sat on the outskirts, surrounded by grassy fields and a small apple orchard. Henry stood waiting on the porch, his calloused hands tucked into his jacket pockets, eyes lighting up as Claire stepped out of the car. He pulled her into a tight hug and whispered, "I missed you." Then he turned to Gavin, offering a polite but measured nod. "Thanks for bringing her home." Gavin shook his hand, his voice deep. "I should be the one thanking you for having us." That evening, Claire cooked a simple meal of stew and cornbread, recipes her mother used to make. Henry talked about the town and this year's harvest, carefully avoiding any mention of the wedding. Gavin listened, asking a few questions now and then. Claire noticed how he tried to fit in, even if the small-town atmosphere wasn't his element. When Henry asked Gavin about his job, he answered modestly, "I work in finance, but honestly, I prefer simpler things like your apple orchard." Henry chuckled for the first time that evening. "Well then, help me fix the shed tomorrow. It's about ready to fall apart." Gavin nodded without hesitation. "I'll try not to break anything." The next morning, Claire woke to the smell of coffee and toast. Looking out the window, she saw Gavin already in the yard, wearing an old shirt and jeans, a far cry from the tailored suits of Boston. He was helping Henry repair the shed, hammer in hand, listening attentively to directions. Claire stood on the porch, coffee in hand, unable to look away. Gavin, who rarely smiled in Boston, was now laughing softly as Henry teased him about holding a hammer like a city slicker. She stepped out, carrying a tray of apple juice. "You two are making fast progress," she said, handing Gavin a glass. He wiped sweat from his forehead, his eyes brighter than usual. "Your dad's a tough boss," he joked, and Henry chuckled, patting him on the back. By afternoon, the shed was repaired with fresh planks and a newly painted door. Gavin even helped with the painting. Claire watched him, warmth blooming in her chest. This wasn't Gavin Shaw, the cold financial mogul. This was just a man, his hands smudged with paint, his smile genuine. It was as if Vermont had peeled back the layers he wore in Boston. That night was the Harvest Festival, a tradition Claire had adored since childhood. The town square glowed with lanterns hung from trees, stalls offering apple pies and roasted corn, and folk music echoing from a local band. Claire guided Gavin through the crowd, pointing out booths she'd visited as a child. "That's Mrs. Martha's stall," she said, nodding at an elderly woman selling jam. "She makes the best apple preserves in the world." Gavin smiled, bought 2 jars, and handed one to Claire. "We'll see if that's true." Claire laughed, really laughed, for the first time since coming home, and it no longer felt forced. They joined the lantern walk, each carrying a delicate paper lantern, moving along the cobbled streets with the townspeople. The soft glow lit up Gavin's face, casting gentle shadows on his sharp features. Claire told him about past festivals, like the time she dropped her lantern and almost set a field on fire. Gavin laughed, a real, full laugh that made Claire stop in her tracks, stunned. She had never heard him laugh like that before, and in that moment, her heart raced. Later, they sat by a roadside corn stall, eating roasted corn dripping with butter. Claire watched Gavin, who bit into his corn like a delighted kid, and couldn't stop herself from asking, "Do you ever do things like this? I mean, normal things?" Gavin shrugged, his eyes drifting toward the lantern lights. "I used to, with Eleanor. She loved the simple stuff, flea markets, festivals, just sitting by the lake with sandwiches." He paused as if the memory ached and comforted him all at once. "After she died, I stopped seeing the point in any of it." Claire nodded, hearing the sorrow in his voice. "I understand. When my mom passed, I thought I'd never smile again. But little things like roasted corn or music from a festival, they remind me that life is still here." Gavin looked at her, his gaze soft. "You remind me of that, Claire. I'd forgotten what this felt like." After the lantern walk, they sat beneath a giant oak tree on a worn wooden bench, watching the crowd thin out. Claire, more at ease than ever, began to talk about her dreams. "I want to open a small wedding card shop," she said wistfully. "Nothing big, just a cozy place where I can tell people's love stories through designs, and a lavender garden so I can smell it every morning. Maybe a little bakery where I make butter cookies every afternoon, just so the house always smells like home." Gavin listened intently, eyes never leaving her. Then he smiled, a real, radiant smile, as if her words had touched something deep inside him. "That sounds like a life worth living," he said, his voice warm. "You make everything feel simple but beautiful." Claire blushed, not used to compliments. "It's just silly stuff." "Not silly," Gavin said firmly. "It's the kind of stuff happiness is made of." They sat there under the lanterns in the starlit sky, and Claire saw a different Gavin, warm, open, someone capable of love. But she also saw that part of him was still caught between past and present, between the memory of Eleanor and the moments he was now sharing with her. She didn't resent Eleanor. She respected the love Gavin had for her. But she couldn't help but wonder, was there still room in his heart for someone new? Or was she just a temporary chapter in his life? Back at her father's house, Claire stood on the porch, watching Gavin hang his coat. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "I don't think I could have come back here without you." Gavin looked at her, his gaze gentle. "Thank you for showing me your Vermont. I really liked it." They smiled at each other, and in that moment, Claire felt they had truly touched each other's lives, not just as 2 people bound by a contract, but as 2 souls beginning to mean something more. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that Gavin, with his rare smiles and scarred heart, was becoming an important part of her world, and she hoped, just maybe, she was becoming part of his too. 4 months had passed since the unexpected wedding in Vermont, and Claire and Gavin had settled into a delicate balance within their temporary marriage. Warm dinners, shared stories of pain, and their trip to the Harvest Festival had brought them closer. Though the boundaries of their contract still quietly lingered, Claire had begun to see a different side of Gavin. Not just the man haunted by loss, but someone who could smile, who could love, who might even belong in her future. But that fragile peace didn't last. One Saturday afternoon, as Claire was sketching a wedding card in their Boston penthouse, the doorbell rang. Gavin was in his office, and she assumed it was a delivery. But when she opened the door, her heart nearly stopped. Trevor Adams stood there in a sharp gray suit, his familiar smile now strained. "Claire," he said hesitantly, "I need to talk to you." Claire froze, her hand tightening around the doorknob. The image of Trevor, the man who had abandoned her at the altar, leaving only a cold message in a storm of public humiliation, flashed through her like a nightmare. She took a deep breath and kept her voice steady. "What are you doing here?" Trevor glanced inside as if making sure no one else could hear. "Can I come in?" "Just for a few minutes." She hesitated, but a mix of curiosity and old anger made her nod. She led him into the living room but didn't offer him a seat. "Talk," she said, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Trevor rubbed his hands together, clearly unused to the cold reception. "Claire, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. What I did on our wedding day, it was the worst thing I've ever done. I don't expect you to understand right away, but I need you to hear the truth." Claire raised an eyebrow and waited. Trevor sighed, lowering his voice. "My parents forced me. The family company was on the brink of collapse, and they arranged for me to marry the daughter of a major investor. A marriage of convenience. I didn't want to, but I didn't have the courage to fight them. I ran because I was scared, and I hurt you." Claire felt the fury rise in her chest, but she kept it in check. "So why are you here now? Your company got saved, or the arranged marriage fell through?" Trevor looked down, guilt, or at least the appearance of it, shadowing his expression. "I realized I made a huge mistake. After I left Vermont, I couldn't stop thinking about you. I broke off the engagement, and now I want to make things right. Claire, I still love you. I want us to start over." The words hit her, not because she still loved him, but because of his nerve. She shook her head, her voice cold. "You think you can just come back after what you did? You left me at the altar, Trevor. You left me to face the humiliation alone. And now you think a simple apology fixes that?" Trevor stepped forward, trying to touch her hand, but Claire backed away. "I know I don't deserve it," he said, voice pleading, "but I'll do whatever it takes to prove I mean it. You don't have to stay with Gavin. He just pities you, Claire. I'm the one who truly wants you." Claire let out a bitter laugh. "Pity? You don't know anything about Gavin, and you don't get to talk about him. I'm his wife, Trevor, and I don't want you back. Not now, not ever." Trevor opened his mouth to argue, but a deep voice came from the living room doorway. "She said no, Trevor. I think it's time you left." Claire turned, heart pounding. Gavin stood there, his gaze cold but controlled. She didn't know how much he had heard, but judging by his face, it was enough. Trevor looked stunned. "Gavin, you actually married her?" Gavin stepped forward, placing himself beside Claire, his presence like a silent wall of protection. "I did, and I don't want to see you here again." Trevor shook his head, disbelief written all over his face. "You married her out of pity, or was it just to prove something to me?" Gavin said nothing, but the look he gave Trevor shut him up. Trevor turned to Claire, voice softer now. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me." Then he left, closing the door behind him and leaving a heavy silence behind. Claire turned to Gavin, searching for the right words. "Gavin, I don't want you to think I still care about him. I only let him in because I needed him to see that I've moved on." But Gavin didn't look at her. He walked to the window, staring out at the distant Charles River. "I heard what he said," he said quietly. "And he wasn't completely wrong. I married you out of pity, Claire. I didn't want you to go through that humiliation alone. But maybe I've kept you here because I didn't want to let go, and that's selfish." His words struck her like a blade. Claire's chest tightened. "Gavin, you didn't keep me here out of selfishness. You gave me a place to start over. You gave me more than I ever expected." He turned to face her, his eyes sorrowful and distant. "You deserve someone who loves you for you, Claire, not someone who's trying to rescue himself. I can't promise that. Not right now." Claire stepped closer, her voice trembling but firm. "I don't need promises. I just need you here, the way you've been here for the past 4 months. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be honest." But Gavin shook his head, eyes closing off, as though rebuilding the walls she had once helped tear down. "I need time," he said hoarsely. "I'm sorry." He left the room, and Claire stood alone in the vast penthouse. She felt as though she had lost something precious, though she wasn't even sure what it was. She wasn't angry with Gavin. She understood he was still at war with the past, with the fear of opening up again. But she was confused because, for the first time, she realized what she felt for him wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something dangerously close to love. In the days that followed, Gavin grew distant. He still joined her for dinner, still asked about her work, but the moments of genuine warmth between them had vanished. He worked late, staying at the office until well past midnight, and when he was home, he kept the door to his study closed. Claire tried to reach out, but every time she mentioned Trevor or that day, Gavin replied with the same curt line, "I'm fine. Don't worry." She felt helpless. She wanted to pull him out of the darkness, the way he once had done for her in Vermont. But she also knew she couldn't force him to open his heart. All she could do was wait and hope that Gavin would come to see that she didn't want to stay because of a contract or pity, but because she truly cared for him. One night, while Gavin was still working late, Claire sat on the sofa, staring at the silver ring on her finger. She thought about everything: the dinners, Gavin's rare smiles, the Vermont trip, and his drunk confession. And she realized that no matter what Gavin believed, he had given her far more than pity. He had given her a reason to believe in herself again, to dream again, and now she wanted to give something back. She pulled out a sheet of paper and began to design, not a letter, but a card. A simple card with a lavender flower on the front and a single line inside. "Thank you for being my safe place." She left it on the dining table, where Gavin would see it when he came home. She didn't know if it would change anything, but she wanted him to know she was still here, whether he was ready or not. Later that night, she heard the door open. Gavin had returned. She didn't know how he would react to the card, but she hoped just a little that it would be a light in the darkness he carried. 6 months had passed since the unexpected wedding in Vermont, leaving Claire Bennett and Gavin Shaw in a relationship without a name, both close and distant. Warm dinners, their trip to Vermont, and the quiet moments of shared pain had drawn them together. But Trevor's return and Gavin's confession that he married her out of pity had rebuilt a wall that Claire could no longer break through. Gavin withdrew, shutting down emotionally the way he had after Eleanor's death, and though Claire tried, she could no longer reach him. She had come to understand her feelings for him, not just gratitude, but love. Yet she also knew she couldn't force him to open his heart before he was ready. The final day of their marriage contract arrived on a cold winter morning. Boston was wrapped in a gray mist, and the wind whistled across the Charles River. Claire woke early in the still penthouse. Gavin had already left for work, leaving a small note on the kitchen counter. "I have meetings all day. See you tonight." Short, emotionless, but Claire had grown used to them. She looked around the penthouse, the kitchen she'd once cleaned, the dining table where they'd shared countless dinners, and the small lavender vase Gavin had bought after their Vermont trip. Everything carried traces of them, but she knew that, according to the contract, today was the day she had to leave. Claire didn't want to go. She had imagined a future where Gavin would open his heart, where they could heal together and build something real. But his distance in recent weeks made her realize she had been hoping alone. She couldn't stay in a relationship where she was the only one dreaming of love. She needed to be honest, with him and with herself. She spent the morning packing, taking only what was hers: a few clothes, her wedding card sketchbook, and a small box of keepsakes from Vermont. She didn't touch anything of Gavin's, not even the lavender vase. But before she left, she sat at the dining table, picked up a piece of paper and a pen, and began to write. She didn't know if her words would change anything, but she needed to say them, at least once. Claire's letter. "Gavin, the past 6 months have been the strangest and most beautiful time of my life. I entered this marriage with a broken heart, thinking I'd never stand again after what happened in Vermont. But you changed that. You stood beside me, at my lowest when the whole world was laughing. You gave me a safe place, a reason to believe I was still worthy of love, even when I had forgotten it myself. I know you didn't marry me for love. I know your heart still belongs to Eleanor, and I never wanted to replace her. But over these months, through shared dinners, your rare smiles, and that trip to Vermont, I've seen a different side of you, a warmer side, a man who can love, a man who made me want to dream again. And somewhere along the way, my heart fell for you. I'm not writing this to make you feel something you're not ready for. I'm leaving, not because I've stopped loving you, but because I can't keep hoping alone. We both need space to figure out what we truly want. But if one day you still carry a little faith in love, and if you believe I'm worth taking a chance on, I'll still be there. Thank you, Gavin, for being my safe place. Claire. She folded the letter and placed it on the table, beside the lavender vase. She took one last look at the penthouse, feeling as though she was leaving behind a part of her heart. Then she grabbed her suitcase, stepped into the elevator, and left, without looking back. She didn't say goodbye to Gavin, not because she was angry, but because she was afraid that if she looked him in the eyes, she wouldn't be able to walk away. Claire returned to Vermont, renting a small apartment near her father's house. She resumed her work, designing wedding invitations for local couples and trying to rediscover her own rhythm. But each night, as moonlight streamed through her window, she thought about Gavin, about his rare smile, about the way he'd listened when she spoke of her dreams. She wondered if he had read her letter, and whether it was enough to stir something in his heart. Back in Boston, Gavin returned to the penthouse late that night, drained from a long day of meetings. He stepped inside and instantly sensed something was off. There was no scent of food in the kitchen, no soft sound of Claire sketching at the table. He called her name, but only silence answered. His heart sank as the realization hit him. She had left. He walked to the dining table, and there it was, her letter, resting beside the lavender vase like a quiet whisper. He sat down, hands slightly trembling as he unfolded the page. With every word, every line, his chest tightened. Claire's words, gentle, honest, and full of love, washed over him like a wave against the walls he had spent 5 years building. She loves me, not because she had to, not because of a contract, but because of me, the scarred man he never thought anyone could love again. He read the letter again, slower this time, and when he reached the line, "My heart fell for you," his vision blurred. A single tear rolled down his cheek, the first he'd shed since Eleanor's death. But it wasn't from grief, it was from a truth he could no longer ignore. He loved Claire too. Not the same way he had loved Eleanor, but in a new, deeper way, built on shared silence, healing moments, and the light she had brought back into his life. "She really does love me," he whispered, voice raw. "And I love her." He clutched the letter tightly, heart pounding. He thought back to every moment, her home-cooked meals, her bright eyes as she spoke of dreams, the way she lit a candle for Eleanor without judgment. Claire wasn't just someone he had rescued. She was the one who had saved him, pulled him out of the darkness he thought would never lift. Gavin stood and looked out over the Charles River through the glass. He knew she had gone back to Vermont, and he knew she hadn't left out of anger. She left because she respected him, because she wanted him to choose her freely. And now, for the first time in 5 years, he felt ready to choose. Not out of guilt, not out of duty, but out of love. He set the letter down, picked up his phone, and called his assistant. "Clear my schedule," he said firmly. "I need to go to Vermont this week." He didn't know if Claire was still waiting, but he knew he couldn't let her go without saying the truth out loud. He loved her, and this time, he wouldn't let fear stand in the way. Her letter had opened a door he thought was shut forever, and now he was ready to walk through it, with her. After leaving Boston, Claire Bennett returned to the small town of Vermont, where green hills and open meadows had once comforted her through heartbreak. She rented a modest apartment near her father's home, and quietly but resolutely began rebuilding her life. Though her heart still ached for Gavin Shaw, the man who had saved her from humiliation at the altar and become an unforgettable part of her world, she knew she had to move forward. The letter she left on the dining table in his Boston penthouse had been her final confession, a silent goodbye, but also a fragile hope that maybe one day Gavin would find his way back to love. Using her savings, Claire opened a small wedding stationery boutique in the town center, calling it Second Chances. The name wasn't just for couples who found love after heartbreak, but a gentle reminder for herself that she too deserved a new beginning. The shop quickly became popular for her delicate, hand-drawn designs, each invitation telling a love story through graceful script and floral art. Claire worked long hours, pouring her heart into every detail, just as she had once sewn every stitch of her own wedding dress. The townspeople, who had once whispered about the abandoned bride, slowly changed their tune. They saw a woman strong, talented, and quietly resilient. No longer the girl left crying at the altar, but each night as she closed her shop and returned to her little apartment, Claire couldn't help but think of Gavin. She remembered his rare smile at the harvest festival, the way he'd listened as she spoke of dreams, the way she imagined he had cried reading her letter, even if she wasn't there to see it. She wondered if he had kept that letter or if he'd gone back to the fortress of silence built after Eleanor's death. Claire didn't blame him. She only hoped he'd find happiness, whether with her or without. The following spring, Vermont bloomed with its annual Lavender Festival, a celebration Claire had loved since childhood. Endless fields of purple stretched beneath soft sunlight, their scent sweet and calming. The town square was strung with golden lanterns, flower stands, and the lilting music of a violin quartet. Claire, now a beloved part of the community, helped organize the event, designing invitations and decorating booths. She wore a pale blue cotton dress, her hair loosely tied back. Her smile, though still tinged with something wistful, was brighter now. On opening night, Claire flitted from booth to booth, ensuring everything was perfect. She didn't notice the familiar figure who had slipped into the crowd, watching quietly from a distance. When she stopped at a lavender stall to check on inventory, a deep voice spoke behind her. "You've always had a way of making things beautiful, Claire." She turned, heart pounding. Gavin Shaw stood there, wearing the same deep blue shirt she once told him made him look more like a regular guy. His hair was slightly tousled, his sharp blue eyes filled with emotion, and his rare, sincere smile left her breathless. "Gavin," she whispered. What are you doing here?" He stepped closer, never breaking eye contact. "I came for you," he said, his voice steady and low. "I read your letter, Claire, and I can't let you go on thinking I didn't feel the same." The festival bustled around them, but Claire felt the world narrow to just the two of them. She shook her head gently, trying to stay composed. "You don't have to do this. I meant what I said in the letter. I didn't want to pressure you. I only wanted you to know." Gavin's smile deepened, his gaze soft but sure. "I know, and I'm here to tell you my truth." He took a breath, gathering courage. "But not here. Will you come with me?" Claire hesitated, but his eyes held a quiet resolve she couldn't turn away from. She nodded, handed off her task to a volunteer, and followed him. He led her to the center of the square, where a small wooden stage had been set up. It was surrounded by strings of golden lights and jars of lavender. The violin music shifted, slow and romantic, as if the moment had been waiting for them. Gavin turned to her, and before she could fully understand, he dropped to one knee. Gasps rose from the crowd, whispers rippled, but Claire heard none of it, only the wild beating of her heart. Gavin looked up at her, eyes shining with a tenderness she had never seen before. "Claire Bennett," he said, voice carrying through the stillness, "I once believed I didn't deserve to love again. After Eleanor, I shut my heart away. I thought that was the only way to stay safe. But then you came." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't dare blink. Gavin continued, voice trembling but unwavering. "You made me want to live again. Your dinners, your smile in Vermont, the letter you left, everything about you reminded me what it means to feel. You didn't just save me. You taught me that life could be meaningful again. I love you, Claire. Not out of pity, not because of a contract, but because of who you are." He pulled out a small box, revealing a silver ring engraved with a tiny lavender motif. "If you still want a groom," he said, voice husky with emotion, "then let me be that man. For real this time. No contracts, no ghosts. Just love." Claire stood frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks, unable to stop smiling. She thought of their journey, from the church in Vermont to the Boston penthouse, from silent dinners to the letter she had left behind. Despite the pain, she knew one thing for certain. She wanted a future with him. She nodded, voice trembling. "Yes, I want you." The crowd erupted into applause, but Claire heard none of it. Gavin stood, slipped the ring onto her finger, and this time, she didn't step back. She stepped into him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Under the warm lantern light, they kissed, a deep, consuming kiss that spoke of everything they had held back for 6 long months. His lips were warm, his arms strong, and Claire felt his heartbeat sync with hers, a promise that they would never lose each other again. That night, after the festival, Claire and Gavin returned to her apartment. Moonlight filtered through the windows, painting the walls in silver. They said little, sitting on the couch, fingers entwined, as if afraid the moment might slip away. "Can I stay?" Gavin asked, his voice quiet but sincere. Claire smiled and nodded, pulling him closer. They kissed again, slower now, deeper, with the kind of intimacy only true love allows. The kiss grew more urgent, a release of all the longing and restraint. Gavin lifted her into his arms, carrying her into the bedroom. Under the soft glow of the moon, they made love, passionately, gently, each touch a healing, every breath a vow. Their bodies and hearts met as one, and the scars of the past began to fade and the warmth of love fully return. In the days that followed, they stayed in Vermont, soaking in the peace of simple moments they had once only dreamed of. They shared dinners with Henry, walked through lavender fields, and began planning a future without contracts, only choices made from love. Claire decided to keep second chances open, and Gavin, true to his word, arranged to spend more time in Vermont. He stepped away from Boston's chaos and into the quiet joy of life beside her. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench outside her shop, fingers laced, Claire rested her head on Gavin's shoulder. "Are you scared?" she asked softly. "That love might hurt again?" Gavin pressed a kiss to her forehead, his voice low and sure. "Yes, but with you, it's worth the risk." Claire smiled, a kind of peace she never thought she'd find settling deep in her chest. They didn't promise a fairy tale, but they promised to stay, through sunshine and storms, with a love rebuilt from second chances. Under Vermont's radiant sky, Claire knew she hadn't just found a groom. She had found her partner for life. Epilogue, 40 years later, second chances still bloom. Spring had returned once again to Vermont, blanketing the hills in lavender and filling the air with its sweet, calming scent. The annual Lavender Bloom Festival had become a beloved tradition in the small town, drawing both locals and visitors to the town square. Now strung with glowing lanterns, flower stalls, and the soft hum of a live violin. At the corner of the square stood Second Chances, the same brick shop with flower boxes under its windows and a weathered wooden sign that still swung gently in the breeze. Inside, Claire Shaw, now 68, her silver hair pinned neatly back, sat behind the counter, adjusting her glasses as she penned the names of a bride and groom onto a wedding invitation. Her handwriting, though slightly shaky, still held its graceful loops and tenderness. She paused to admire the delicate floral border she'd painted by hand. Just as she'd done for decades, each card was a story. Each couple reminded her of the unlikely beautiful story she had once lived herself. The door to the back room creaked open. Gavin Shaw appeared, his hair white now, his frame a little slower, but his presence still calm, steady, and unshakably warm. He carried 2 mugs of chamomile tea, placing one beside Claire before leaning down to kiss her silver crown. "Careful," he teased. "Write one wrong letter and the bride might sue." Claire chuckled, giving him a look over the rim of her glasses. "Don't forget who saved the mayor's wedding from a printing disaster back in 2009. Gavin smiled, settling into the seat beside her. They both looked out through the window at the bustling square. Claire sighed gently. "I never imagined we'd come this far." Gavin squeezed her hand. "I did. The moment I read your letter, I knew. Letting you walk away would have been the biggest mistake of my life." They sat in comfortable silence, letting the memories drift quietly between them. After all the years, after grief, guilt, hope, and healing, they had built a life that was not flashy, not built in boardrooms or skyscrapers, but on a small town corner filled with paper, ink, and love. Every wedding card they created, every lavender stem Claire pressed into a new design, whispered a story of resilience. Their grandchildren, especially the little one, currently doodling with crayons in the back corner, knew by heart the tale of how Grandma Claire once left a letter that changed Grandpa Gavin forever. And every year at the Lavender Festival, Gavin still gave her a